semi-vicious in black to well-to-do in yellow. So as I say, this is a reproduction of that work. Let's open it up and have a look inside. It really is a gorgeous book. says London. The population in 1901 was 4,536,541 people. The social condition of inhabitants, inquiry conducted by Charles Booth, 1889-91. Number 1. By families according to means. Classification. Semi-criminal, very poor, poor, comfortable, middle class and wealthy, and this was the colour classification. So the percentage of people in these different groups, 0.9% for semi-criminal, up to 1.1% wealthy. So most people appeared to be in the 51.5% group, which was comfortable. 30.7% of people in London were in poverty, and 69.3% were in comfort. Number 2. According to rooms occupied or number of servants employed, the classification was 4 or more persons per room occupied, 3 and under 4 persons per room occupied, up to less than 1 person. Then we have persons living in hotels, institutions, etc., indoor servants, all other families which have 2 or more servants, and all the classifications in between. So 30.1% of people lived in crowded accommodation, and 66.2% lived in not crowded accommodation. So on the left hand side here we have an original note, causes of pauperisation. A was an absence or irregularity of work, bad pay, lack of capacity, drink, extravagance. Large family, early marriage, heredity, illness, immorality, crime, laziness, mental deficiency, no relation, loss of parents, orphans, pauperism as a source of, can't quite read that, I think it might be preference, temper, recklessness, surroundings, trade circumstances, unhealthy trade, deserted, loss of husband or wife, widowed, accidents, misfortune and old age. So this is the introduction, so I think I might read some of this to you. Booth's maps are the focal point, the hero of this book. From the very first one, coloured in 1888, to the last set, reproduced here as both preparatory maps and printed sheets, which describe London poverty in 1898-99. The maps remain the most significant documentary account ever made of London. Once seen, Booth's maps enter the visual memory of those who live, work, or just walk on the streets of London. those older workshops were being pulled down, small new factories were being constructed, and new houses were springing up. London never stood still then, just as it does not now. Poring over the maps in this volume brings us remarkably close to the past, but a past that was itself in a state of change. When Charles Booth and his associated army of researchers created their poverty maps of London in the late 19th century, they probably had little idea that now in the 21st century these would still be held up for admiration. They remain important, both as historical and social science documents, and as objects to be marvelled at by all. And surely the most wonderful point about these maps is that by engaging with them nowadays, everyone can become historians and social scientists. The maps. The poverty maps use colours to show the distribution of rich and poor, street by street around London. The lowest class of poverty is found in the blacks and dark blues, the highest style of life in red and then yellow. In the middle lie the paler blues, the violets and the pinks, used for the in-between levels of living. The colours show us immediately where poverty existed in the midst of plenty. Of course, there are some few regions, such as Bloomsbury, where yellow and red dominate in buildings with gardens and space, and others where dark blue prevails and housing is squashed together, as in Southwark. And yes, the east, where Booth's project began, is more blue than the west, but in many, perhaps most areas, we can see how very mixed the districts are. Even those areas we might think would be uniformly red or yellow have pockets of dark blue and black. In general, we can find the main streets are usually red and spacious, with the poorer places packed in behind, or we note red and yellow around the open spaces, with black and blue a little further off in the mews and back alleys. The maps show the mix-up of people, but they also show how industrial sites, churches, institutions and parks intersect with living space. There is no zoning here, but the higgledy-piggledy of a site that had largely grown naturally rather than according to plan. Okay. So let's carry on. So these are the Investigator's notebook covers. Selected walks made by investigators. So these are like little maps that were made of different locations. So just as an example, this one here is the Southwestern Walk location within District 39, which is Wandsworth and Putney. The walk was made in November 1899 by Arthur Baxter with Police Constable Mullet. Boundaries: on the north River Thames, on the east Metropolitan District Railway, on the south Lytton Grove, west side and the East India Docks in the east, and bounded by the Thames in the south and Victoria Park, now the Olympic Park, in the north. Booth chose the area because it was well known as a generally poor area of East London, and he thought that this place, if anywhere, would show that the earlier 25% accounting of poverty had overestimated the number. As it turned out, Booth was wrong. As his first report showed in 1887, the area had a much higher poverty rate of 35% of households. But how did he find this answer? Booth had begun by asking himself and his colleagues who would know how poor a household is. The answer led him to the school visitors who visited every house and every household within a dwelling in order to record the number of people in each family and the ages of the children. They did so on a regular basis, and they were often in the posts long term, so they got to know the families in their patch rather well. School was obligatory, but not necessarily free. Their task was to assess the poverty of every family in order to judge whether their children could go to school for free or would have to pay a contribution. To make this judgment, they would observe the poverty of each family by marking the appearance of healthiness and clothing of the occupants, and the nature of accommodation, as well as learn about the occupations of those of working age in order to get an idea of their sources of income. Okay, let's carry on. So here we have notebooks from the Industry and Religious Influences series on this side, and notebooks from the Poverty series on this side. The causes of poverty. Another critical bit of research needs to be referred to here, as it ties all the work on the categories into Booth's view of poverty, and moreover links to policy actions. For his account of East London, Booth asked 9 of the visitors who best knew the poorest and very poorest households in their patch to use their knowledge to mark out reasons why any individual household was poor. He analysed a sample of 4,000 of these households to get a better idea of the causes of poverty among those 4 classes that were most vulnerable. Classes A and B, those in great poverty, and C and D, those in poverty. As his analysis revealed, questions of employment dominated the causes of poverty. The problem of casual or irregular work with low pay for the poorest classes A and B, and of low pay with regular earnings or of irregular earnings or small profits, made up the largest cause in both sets of classes A and B and C and D. offices in New York and Liverpool. He stood as a Member of Parliament for Toxteth in Liverpool, and although failing to win the seat, became obsessed with the problem of urban poverty. He spent a huge fortune organising and working on his inquiry into the life and labour of London over 17 years to produce 17 volumes of evidence and analysis. There is a large literature on Booth, the person, as on his maps and research, which reveals a number of surprises. We learn that this impressive inquiry was fitted into a full-time working business week. He more or less ran the family firm, splitting his weekdays between London and Liverpool and his family house in Leicestershire, and spending 3 months or so each year in New York. His inquiry filled the hours in between. His research team was originally organised out of his London office, and later out of the London offices of the Royal Statistical Society. He habitually worked late into the night to analyse his materials and to write, then editing the volumes in conjunction with his wife, Mary. Despite some early and continuing health problems, he kept to a punishing schedule of work on both business and research fronts until his death in 1916. So here we have statistics taken from life and labour of the London people, or the people in London. Shoreditch, Bethnal Green, Stepney, Mile End, Hackney, Poplar, St George and Whitechapel. So we can see, for example, in Poplar, a tiny percent were vicious semi-criminal, and the largest percentage of people was people with ordinary earnings. In St George, we can see that the section on D is people in regular work, and then a tiny percentage is the wealthy. And here we have the colour combinations in the maps. Lowest class, very poor, poor, mixed, poor and comfortable, comfortable, middle class and upper class, which is in yellow or gold. So here we have the first chapter. This is the Eastern District. So we see the statistics of gender, employment, birthplaces, poverty versus comfort, age and social classification. We can see that there were far more men than women. Only 17% of people were female. In employment, most people were employed. Birthplaces are 59% of people were born in London and 41% out of London. Poverty versus comfort. Living in poverty 33.6% and living in comfort 66.4%. Age groups 13.5% were under the age of 5, and on the other scale, people over 65, only 3.8%. Social classification 67.3% lived in not crowded areas and Investigator's notebooks. At the top we've got a walk by George H. Duckworth with District Inspector of Police Mr. Carter for Poplar and Limehouse, 28th of May 1897. And here we have Prostitution in East India Dock Road, a walk by the same men in Bow and Bromley. 2 days later. This is sheet 51 of the maps. This is Shoreditch. And you can see quite clearly the colour classifications of whether you were living in poverty or not. The dark blue and blues, remember, poverty and semi-criminal, and the reds and yellows, or golds, people who lived in wealth and comfort. This is Bethnal Green and Tower Hamlets. And here we have the West Ham area. This map covers Ratcliffe, Limehouse, Stepney, Shadwell, Bowcommon and Mile End, Old Town. Here we have Bromley, Poplar and South Bromley. There's the India Dock, East India Dock, Poplar Gas Works. So here we have a page which looks at Tower Hamlets in some focus. We've got some photographs. So let's have a look. This number is number 4. West India Dock Road. At the door a woman, well fed but ill-dressed. Her dress is literal tatters, impossible to understand why it kept on at all. As a contrast, at the rear end of the court, a fairly well-dressed middle-aged woman with one of the wickedest of faces. This is a favourite thieves' resort. You are robbed in the West India Dock Road. Off goes the thief, down Chasham Street. You follow, and if you are close enough behind him, can manage to land yourself in Chasham Place. There he suddenly disappears. You are glad enough to get out of the place without further mishap. As a rule, the thief will have nipped over the wall onto the towing path, and your right course would have been to turn up the Burdett Street, down onto the towing path, and there he probably would have ran into your arms. And then we're on to chapter 2, the Northeastern District. But I'm going to leave it there. If you enjoyed taking a look at this lovely book, let me know in the comments and maybe we can revisit it again. This is Kate.